courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. It's time for courage in the darkness with the host, Phil Roberts. Awakening America to the indoctrination and radicalization. Let's get into it.
A professor with 30 years of teaching experience, published, respected, hundreds of students mentored, says something in a classroom that contradicts the prevailing campus ideology. Not something illegal, not a threat, an opinion. Within hours, students are demanding his removal. Social media labels him a bigot, colleagues go quiet, the administration releases a statement about safe spaces. Within weeks, he's gone. 3 decades of contribution erased for expressing a view that his students found uncomfortable. This is not a hypothetical. Versions of this story are playing out at universities across the country, tracked and documented by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which records hundreds of incidents annually. Professors investigated for teaching historical texts that contain difficult language. A biology professor pressured to apologize for teaching that biological sex is determined by chromosomes. A law professor hauled before administrators for quoting from a legal case record during a class on the law. An economics professor put under review for presenting mainstream research on minimum wage effects that students found ideologically inconvenient. These are not outliers. They are the system working as designed, and the product that system is shipping into American life every year is worth examining very carefully. The enforcement pattern on campus is not random, and it's definitely not neutral. FIRE's 2024 College Free Speech Rankings, surveying 58,000 students across 248 institutions, found that 66% of students reported self-censoring in the classroom at least some of the time. Nearly a quarter said that they did so often. The ideas students reported being most afraid to express: conservative political views, religious beliefs, and any position that questions progressive orthodoxy on race, gender, or sexuality. The selective enforcement is the tell. A professor can say nearly anything about conservatives, about Christians, about traditional values, and face no institutional consequence. The same professor who uses a racial slur while quoting a legal case under legal analysis faces calls for termination. A student who organizes a pro-life display finds it vandalized while administrators look the other way. A student who invites a conservative speaker finds protesters pulling fire alarms to force cancellation. And the student organizers, not the disruptors, get investigated for creating an unsafe environment. That asymmetry is not accidental. It is the operating logic of a system that has decided some viewpoints deserve protection and others deserve punishment. The DEI bureaucracies we've covered in earlier episodes are a significant part of the enforcement mechanism, not just in hiring, but in the daily adjudication of whose speech is acceptable and whose is a conduct violation. Diversity, as administered on the modern campus, does not include viewpoint diversity. The data makes that plain. Here is the downstream consequence that makes this more than a campus issue. The students graduating from these institutions are not just uninformed about opposing views, they have been actively formed to treat opposing views as dangerous, as harm, as violence, as something requiring institutional suppression rather than intellectual engagement. That formation does not stay on the campus. It goes out to the workforce. It goes into the newsrooms, where editors spike stories that contradict the approved narrative. It goes into HR departments, where training materials teach employees that certain political views create hostile work environments. It goes into corporate boardrooms, where ESG commitments are enforced with the same ideological consistency as campus speech codes. It goes into government agencies, where career staff with a specific formation make decisions about whose speech merits investigation. Cancel culture on campus is not a campus problem. It is the factory producing the people who will run everything else. The argument that this is only a problem for conservatives misses the deeper issue. A mind that has been formed to reach for suppression rather than argument, that has been trained to respond to intellectual discomfort with institutional force rather than counter-evidence, is not a functional mind for a self-governing society. Democracy requires the capacity to disagree without trying to destroy. Courts require the capacity to reason from evidence rather than from ideological conclusion. Science requires the capacity to follow data wherever it leads. All of those capacities are being systematically degraded in the people who are supposed to fill those roles. The tools for pushing back on this are real, and several of them are already working. FIRE's free speech rankings have become a genuine accountability mechanism. Schools that consistently suppress speech see their rankings, and their reputations with prospective students who value intellectual freedom suffer for it. Over the last 2 years, universities from Harvard to Stanford have revised their speech policies under public and legal pressure. Sunlight works when it's applied consistently. State legislative action has produced the most structural results. Florida and Texas passed legislation prohibiting ideological litmus tests in faculty hiring, dismantling DEI bureaucracies, and establishing enforceable free speech protections on public campuses. Over a dozen states have followed with similar legislation. Public universities are state-funded institutions, and state legislatures have legitimate authority to set the conditions under which that funding flows. Using that authority is not politicizing education. It is restraining institutions that had already been politicized in one direction. Federal funding conditionally is the largest lever available. Universities receive billions annually in research grants and student aid. The Trump administration moved in 2025 to condition that funding on compliance with civil rights standards that include viewpoint discrimination protections. When the money is at stake, institutional behavior changes. Harvard's reversal on several speech-related policies in early 2025, after federal funding reviews were announced, demonstrated exactly how quickly the incentive structure can shift. And litigation is working. First Amendment protections apply fully to public universities. FIRE has won case after case establishing clear boundaries on what institutions can do to punish protected speech. Every victory establishes precedent. Every financial judgment against a university that violated those protections makes the next violation more expensive. Make it costly enough, and the institutional calculus changes. The university was built on a single foundational premise: truth is worth pursuing. And pursuing it requires the freedom to ask any question, examine any evidence, and reach any conclusion the evidence supports. That premise is incompatible with a system that predetermines which conclusions are acceptable. You cannot have genuine education and ideological enforcement at the same time. One of them has to go. What has to go is the enforcement. Not because every idea deserves equal credibility, it does not, but because the capacity to reason through competing ideas, to engage disagreement without reaching for suppression, to be intellectually uncomfortable and remain functional. That capacity is what produces people capable of sustaining a free society. It is what we are losing, and the cost of losing it does not stay on campus. The tools to fight this exist. Use them, and do not wait for someone else to go first. Support the Truth in the Darkness Network at TITDUSA.com and the Stand Against the Silence campaign. Stand with us, support the mission, refuse the silence. I'll see you next time.